Hey there, welcome to the Nourished Child Podcast. I'm Jill Castle, your host. I'm a pediatric dietitian, and I've been taking a break this summer from airing live episodes. This is the last reshare I'll be doing this summer, and I will be returning in 2 weeks live with a whole bunch of new and exciting topics, episodes, and guests. I'm resharing a show called Ignore It with Catherine Pearlman. This is a show that a lot of my listeners enjoyed. She is the author of the book, Ignore It. I thought that perhaps your child's behaviors might be getting a little annoying to you right now, or maybe you could just use a pep talk. So that's why I decided to reshare this episode. In this episode, Catherine Pearlman walks us through her method for creating good behaviors in our kids, the types of behaviors we want to see. She explains how every kid acts out sometimes, which can make it even more frustrating than usual to guide them on a path of healthy development. She coaches us in how to look the other way and simply ignore the attention-seeking actions from our children. Not easy, that's for sure, but she does break it down in a way that makes it easier for all of us, especially what behaviors are acceptable to ignore and what are not. One of her main points is to not reward bad behavior, and giving too much attention to it is rewarding to kids. Kind of the opposite of what you would think. It's a good thing she's an expert in the psychological aspect of this, because it's easy to think that if we work hard with our children on their negative behaviors, they will change. But Catherine shows us that's not the case. You've got to tune into this one. And remember, I will be back live in just a couple of weeks. Until then, take a listen.
Welcome to the Nourished Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
You've heard the advice, ignore bad behavior. Your child is begging for snacks? Ignore it. Your child is whining in church? Ignore it. Your child is interrupting others at the table? Ignore it. Yeah, right. While ignoring bad behavior is a huge challenge, because who doesn't feel compelled to step in and correct or redirect your child? Dr. Catherine Pearlman says it's what we absolutely should be doing. Dr. Pearlman is a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of The Family Coach, a private practice that helps parents resolve typical parenting issues like discipline, sibling fights, picky eaters, potty and sleep training, and more. She's the author of Ignore It: How Selectively Looking the Other Way Can Decrease Behavioral Problems and Increase Parenting Satisfaction. Catherine's work has appeared in a variety of news outlets, including U.S. News, the LA Times, CNN.com, and the Wall Street Journal. She's an assistant professor at Brandman University, teaching the next generation of social workers. She received her doctorate in social welfare at Yeshiva University and her master's degree in social work from New York University. She lives in California with her husband, 2 mostly well-behaved children, and dog Norma. Today, Dr. Pearlman's talking with us about why ignoring unpleasant behavior actually helps. And she gives us pointers on food-related behaviors like begging for food, complaining about food, and overeating, among others. You'll learn about her 6-step process for ignoring so that you actually improve your child's behavior. I can't wait for you to hear this interview. You'll be able to tune in on iTunes or another Android podcast listening app. Plus, you can head over to my website and listen there. It's at jillcastle.com/090. That's 090 for episode number 90. Before we start, let's dig into the mailbag. Dear Jill, I love your podcast show and your articles on nutrition and family. My daughter is 12 going on 13 and has ADD, inattentive type, and has been taking Focalin XR, a stimulant, since she was 7. She was grossly underweight for 3 years. Then it seemed like her body began to get used to the medication and she began to gain weight and look very healthy. I've always encouraged good, healthy eating habits, even when she was underweight. However, it seemed that as she began to gain weight, I would restrict by talking about, quote unquote, healthy choices to fuel our bodies. I don't want to restrict, but my positive spin on healthy options and good choices have backfired into a restrictive food environment. Over the past year, I've been realizing what I've been doing, and I have been implementing your tools from your articles and podcasts. Over the past several years, she has had rapid weight gain, mostly located in her midsection. When she turned 12, I had her blood drawn. The blood test showed high cholesterol and fatty liver. I want to help my daughter be healthy without damaging her because of my restrictions. I feel paralyzed because I am trying to love with limits, but when I see her eating unhealthy foods, I know it's taking her down a dangerous path. Do you think it's too late? I'm a mama in need of some help. Well, listener, mama in need of help, I can totally understand how you must be feeling about your daughter and some of the things that you've implemented in the past. I know your intentions were good in trying to help your daughter be a little bit more selective with her food choices. I wouldn't beat yourself up too much. I know the middle school years can be particularly hard, but I don't think all is lost. What I would say, and the reason why I wanted to share this story with all of you out there, is that sometimes we're not sure when we need to get more help. And I think this is a situation where this mama could use more professional help for her daughter. I see several areas based on this story, and of course, I don't know all the details of the story, but a couple of areas surface for me in terms of areas that could use some work. Trust being probably one of the number one areas. Trust and restoring faith in this child that she can have the foods that she enjoys in her own home without guilt, shame, or needing to sneak. I think that trust has probably been eroded over time. I see it happening with lots of kids who grow up in restricted or forbidden food environment. So restoring that, and how do you restore that trust? It's not easy, but it's making those forbidden foods or those restricted foods available and allowing your child to have at them at particular times, not all day, not every day, but that when they are served or they are available, they are given freely without strings attached. Probably the feeding schedule needs to be looked at. So what are the timing of meals and snacks? Is the timing set up in a way that encourages fullness and satiety in your child? Again, thinking about fullness and satiety, relooking at the food offerings, the balance of foods that are being offered to your child. I think that, a hard look at sugar intake, added sugar intake. Is it too much? Remember, I like to teach my clients the 90-10 rule, which I'll include the link in the show notes, but it's a way of balancing all those healthy, nutritious food groups with sugary and fatty foods. So we don't take sugary and fatty foods out of the diet. We try to balance them so that they are in a reasonable place so children can enjoy them, but they don't have to be taking over or be the lion's share of the diet. I think the other thing that could use some work is just talking and creating an environment where your daughter perceives food abundance rather than food scarcity. And there's some techniques for doing that with how you serve meals. For example, family style meals can create an environment of abundance rather than scarcity. I'll include family style meals in the show notes as well, an article I've written on that, and I have a podcast on that as well. But what I would say overall is that her metabolic changes due to her weight are probably the things that need more of an approach, an immediate help. not in a way that puts her on a diet or restricts her food intake, but in a supportive, balanced way that addresses food, feeding, her developmental stage, her psychological relationship with food, and with, her caretakers. So what I would say, that high cholesterol and fatty liver, I would really recommend that you seek out a pediatric dietitian or a dietitian in your area that's trained in working with children and who has a balanced approach to managing something like this. I did do a podcast episode with the Optimal Weight for Life ladies, and they talked a lot about how they approach children who are experiencing excess weight gain and the metabolic changes that can come with that. So that podcast I'll include in the show note links for you. I also have an online course that outlines the basics of food, feeding, and lifestyle choices for kids ages 4 to 14 years. And that might be a good place to double check your home environment for food, your feeding style and practices, and the habits that your child is participating in day to day, from the amount of sleep she's getting to activity levels day in and day out, and other things like watching TV and motivation techniques and helping around the house and chores. So that's the Nourish Child Project. That's my program, which I think is something that's basic starting point for anyone who wants to learn about food, feeding, and healthy habits, or who wants to double check that they've got their food system in the right place, that they're feeding with positivity, love, and limits, and that they're working on those habits, because some of those habits, like TV viewing, for example, or staying up all night, they don't help your child's health. They can actually hinder it. So thank you so much for writing that email to me and allowing me to have a discussion about it here on the podcast. I hope it will help other parents out there. In other news, I am in the beginning of August as I record this, and I cannot believe we are headed to back to school in just a little over a week's time. What I'm doing, I'm going college shopping with my youngest. If you follow me on Facebook or Instagram, Facebook is the Nourish Child page, or on Instagram, I am PDRD on Instagram, you will see that my youngest just got his EMT certification. Very, very proud of him for doing that. He spent his summer, in addition to rowing every day, he spent his summer going to EMT class, 2 half days a week and 1 full day a week for 12 weeks. So I'm really proud of him. I'm sending 2 girls back to school, back to college during this month, and I'm prepping for a 10-day trip to Colorado and Arizona for some golf and friend visiting, some speaking, and some more golf. So I'll be at the Strong Families Arizona Conference right after Labor Day. If you're there too, let's be sure that we connect. All right, I've talked enough, so let's get to the good stuff. Here's Catherine Pearlman. Hi, Catherine. Welcome to the Nourish Child podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's nice to have you here. I've enjoyed reviewing and reading your book, Ignore It: How Selectively Looking the Other Way Can Decrease Behavioral Problems and Increase Parenting Satisfaction. When did you write the book?
I think I wrote it like 2016 for the most part. And really, it came out of working as a family coach and with kids and families for, 20, 25 years. I kind of put all the work I had done into the book.
Yeah, I can totally relate because I wrote a book called Fearless Feeding. Same thing. It was like 25 plus years of experience, and this all needs to go into a book.
Yeah, it makes the book writing easier.
It does, but it's also a little challenging to siphon it down, though, to the most salient points, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So you're a mom. You call yourself the family coach. You have, I assume, a private practice of some sort?
Yeah. So I started my practice where I go into the homes directly and help people there. Because what I found was, it could take 10, 20 sessions in my office to see dynamics, to understand what's going on in the home. And I could literally show up for an hour between 4 and 5 o'clock and just observe, do nothing. And I really get to see the whole picture. And so that's really how I developed my practice.
That's really cool. So what would you say, in your years of doing that, observing behaviors, what are some of the things that just keep coming up for families that they may not even know?
I mean, that's really what Ignore It kind of came out of. I felt like I was saying to every family I went to, no matter what was the reason they called me, to ignore it, so it was a lot of whining and complaining and tantruming. That's very common from young kids, from teenagers, not listening. Parents are trying their best, but sometimes they're misguided in what they're doing, and what they're doing is actually making things worse for themselves. So being able to go in and observe, I can say, okay, here's what I saw, and here's what I recommend. Let's try it this way tomorrow, and then let me know how it goes. And then they try it a different way and they see a different response. And then they're like, wow, this is amazing. Because you can't make your kids eat. You can't make them behave, but you can change the way you behave. And that can very much greatly influence your kids' behavior.
I find I say that so much to my own clients. You cannot make your child eat. And if you get into the business of trying to make that happen, it never ends well.
No.
So whining at the grocery store, begging for extra treats, interrupting. Why do kids do this stuff?
The main reason kids whine, complain, beg is because it works. It's highly effective. If it wasn't effective, they wouldn't do it. And so maybe it's effective in the supermarket 1 out of 20 times, but the child is encouraged enough to try to do it more often and hope to get something that they want. Or sometimes a parent negotiates. So parent says no to more video games, but then agrees to let the child watch a TV show, or says no to dessert, but then lets them have a sugar-free Jell-O. So they think, well, I said no to cake, but I'm giving them something that I still think is better. And so the kid is like, oh, well, that worked. I should do that more often. And so that's really why they do it.
So do you think this is, I'm a little off our topics of talking right now, but I do a lot of work with families around feeding, and feeding styles align a lot with parenting styles. And there's a feeding style that's a permissive or indulgent feeding style. Mm-hmm. And some of this, is some of this permissive parenting in, which is really more of like how the parent is hardwired around their parenting style? Or is it reactionary parenting to, the child that's in front of them?
Actually, I think it's a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. I think that nowadays, there's more two-parent working households or single-parent households. People are busier with activities with their kids. There's very little downtime. I think parents are exhausted. And so sometimes it's easier to be permissive. At the end of a long day, I don't feel like arguing with you. Fine, I'll give in. But I've already said no. But now I say yes. So that is what's encouraging the behavior for the child. But I also think that when the parent was raised a certain way, that comes into play often as well. So I usually ask parents, tell me a little bit about how you grew up. In addition to what I see is going on here, I want to know a little bit, because sometimes parents swing very far the other way from the way they grew up. And sometimes they do exactly what their parents did, but they can understand how that feels or where that goes for them. Like, for example, my dad grew up having to eat everything off his plate. And so we grew up that way. And so when my daughter was young, I couldn't make her eat anything, because I remembered so much feeling just hating to have to clean my plate or drink my milk, which I was allergic to and nobody realized. So I could relate to that. So I swung so far in the other direction and had to make that connection so that I could then be more present and work with what was in front of me.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good example. And I feel like I do the same with a lot of my clients, because they are, they're reacting to picky eating, or they're handling it in the wrong manner. And it does stem from the way that they were brought up. Either they're just repeating what was, the methods that they were raised with, or they're actually doing the exact opposite. And I, too, was also raised in the Clean Plate Club.
Yeah.
Couldn't leave the table till I ate my dinner. Okay, so when kids do these things, they beg, they whine, they complain, they interrupt, naturally, a parent wants to do something about it. They want to either reprimand them, discipline, make them feel happy. I hear that a lot. Parents don't want to disappoint their children. They want them to be happy. But you're saying that doing something about these undesirable behaviors is not really the way to correct them.
Right. So any behavior that has a reward will be repeated. So there are all kinds of rewards kids get, and sometimes they don't feel much like rewards, but they are still rewarding to the child. So even if they don't get the cookie or they don't get more screen time, they're getting attention. So imagine a family that has, a newborn baby and the older child is just like, please, somebody look at me, somebody play with me. And if I can't get attention in the good way, I'm going to get it in a less desirable way. But that attention I get from my parent, even if they're yelling at me, even if they're reprimanding me, is still a reward. And that's still attention I'm getting that my little baby brother isn't getting. Sometimes the rewards are material. They actually get, whatever it is that they're asking for or something that resembles it. They get attention. Sometimes that whining, complaining and all that get something removed from the table, or the situation like they whine and complain about eating their vegetables. And so a parent removes them or says, okay, you don't have to eat them all. You only have to eat half. So that behavior was effective. The reward was actually removing something unpleasant that they didn't want. And so the child misbehaves, the parent responds with these rewards and then encourages the child to do it more. If the rewards were removed, the child wouldn't do it. But the thing is, parents think that, children need lessons. They need a lot of teaching. And that's why, we're here to raise good humans. And so we think the way to do that is to tell them what to do, what's right all the time. Most of the time, the kids know what's right. They know what they need to do. They don't want to do it. They know they have to have a bath. That's just part of life, but they don't want to do it. So they whine and complain to try and get out of it. And sometimes that works. So really, it's a learned behavior. And if parents can break away from feeling like they have to teach all the time, especially in these moments, then the behavior can change. Absolutely teach your kids, but not in the moment of misbehavior, because it's like not listening. I always remind parents, I don't know if your listeners remember the Peanuts, Snoopy and Charlie Brown movies, and the teacher never said words. She always said, wah, 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 wah. And that's what kids are hearing in that moment when they're, doing what they're not supposed to do. And you're saying, you're not supposed to hit your brother, or, you have to eat vegetables and, you have to empty the dishwasher, whatever it is. They know all of this, they're not listening at all. And those words mean nothing. So sometimes less is more. And if we can break the cycle of rewarding kids for their unpleasant behavior, they'll decide to get rewards for the good stuff instead.
So I imagine a lot of times the parents you're working with, and just parents in general, really need to understand what a reward is, because I'm thinking that a lot of parents think, oh, giving you the candy that you want in the grocery aisle is a reward. Yeah, that's easy to identify.
Yeah.
But maybe they're not identifying the negative rewards, or what would you call it? Negative reinforcement?
Well, negative reinforcement is actually like the example I said where we remove the carrots. It's like the reward is actually taking away something unpleasant. And positive reinforcement is really any kind of reward that where we're giving something. We're giving more screen time. We're giving a cookie. We're giving our attention. That's positive reinforcement. And so you're right. I think parents can recognize a reward in the most obvious positive way, but they are not thinking about the attention or the non-material rewards that they're giving their kids all the time.
And so helping them identify that, hey, when you take away XYZ, that's actually a reward for your child.
Right. And also, I use the example of toddlers and teens a lot because they're very similar in the way they tantrum. For example, they both want more independence than they're really ready for. And they get very frustrated when they can't have what they want. The teenager wants to go out on a weeknight, or the toddler wants to dress inappropriately. They want to do something and they're not allowed. And so
does the teenager.
Exactly. The teenager doesn't want to wear
to dress inappropriately too.
100%. Exactly. That's my point. They're so similar. And so the thing is, a lot of parents know that they're not going to let their kid out on a school night. No matter how much the kid tantrums, they're not going to allow it. And they're not going to allow their toddler to go out in flip-flops when it's snowing outside. They're just not going to allow it. But this makes the teenager and the toddler very, very angry. And so when the toddler and the teen realizes they're not going to get what they want, at least what they can get is the mom or dad being angry. And that's the reward. So it's like the parent gets so frustrated and angry and starts yelling, and the kid's like, yep, there we go. I feel better. And so that's the reward. And so parents do need to be educated on all the different kinds of rewards that they're giving their kids. And again, rewards encourage the behavior to be repeated.
So in the book, you dig into B.F. Skinner, the ABC method. Can you talk about that and explain it in a way where parents can understand it fairly easily?
Yes. So Behavior that has a reward will be repeated. Like that's the basis for a lot of behavioral work and B.F. Skinner. And so reinforcement rewards encourage certain behaviors, right? We talked about positive and negative ones already. And what I like to teach parents to do is to think about the ABC. There's something that happens that prompts the behavior. So that's the antecedent. That's the A. So a parent says it's time to turn the TV off and come for dinner or get ready for bed. Or it's time to eat your vegetables or to do a chore, whatever it is. That's the antecedent. That's what prompts the behavior response. The B is the behavior, right? That comes in response to the antecedent. So what the parent said, it's time to turn the TV off. Well, you can imagine the kid's not going to be very pleased by this. And then the negative behavior comes. And then what the parent does after that is the consequence. We think of consequences as negative, but they could be positive too. And in this case, it's the reward. So the parent says it's time to turn the TV off. The child throws a fit and the parent says, okay, fine, you can have 5 more minutes. That's the consequence. That's the reward. The child says, ooh, that was very useful. I should do that next time. And I guarantee the next time the parent says it's time to turn the TV off, we're going to have the exact same scene because there was a reward. So it's A, B, C. What prompts the behavior comes. And then the most important part is, what is the response to that behavior? That response will determine if the behavior is repeated. And that's where ignored comes in. If we ignore that response, then there's no reward. And the kid says, well, that wasn't effective. I still didn't get more television. I still didn't get a cookie. I still didn't get whatever it was I was looking for. I might as well not bother with that.
That's very interesting because it really points to the parent as the person who has the ability to control, and maybe control is a strong word, but who has the ability to modulate the responses ultimately.
And it's very freeing for parents. When they realize this, they feel so much better. You know, parents whose kids are very much misbehaving in public or at home, they feel very out of control. They feel very not able to manage their kids, and that feels terrible. So when they learn this and they realize that they actually do have the power to change things by changing themselves, they feel so much better. And also there's something amazing that happens when you're actually ignoring that tantrum. And we'll talk about it a little bit later. I hope they're not really ignoring, but they're acting like they're ignoring the behavior. They're disconnecting emotionally and they're not in a battle of wills, which I'm sure you see all the time at the table. When you disconnect from that battle of wills, you feel so much better. And then you start enjoying your kids more. And that's really the goal of all of this. Is like, we want to have kids. We want to enjoy that time. So, yeah.
It's funny because I get a lot of questions and do a lot of counseling around behavior at the family meal time. And I'm always telling parents, you only have to plan the menu, cook the food and put it on the table. Then release yourself. You don't have to get involved in whether your child eats or how much they eat. Just really like do your job, get it on the table, and then like disconnect, like emotionally enjoy your meal, talk to your spouse. You know, obviously talk to your kids too, but any kind of like, I don't like this or I didn't want this, like disconnect, like that's the meal, it's done. And I got a really good sense by reviewing your book that you have very similar philosophies around that dinner time dynamic that can go downhill really fast.
I have the exact same philosophy as you, because, you know, it ends up that every single mealtime becomes about what do I have to eat? How many bites do I have to eat? I don't like the way this looks. And it takes over. And really, it could be the most beautiful time of the day, just a half hour where there's no electronics and the families come together. And that's when we talk about things and we get to know each other and we laugh as a family. And all of that is taken away because we're so focused on the, I don't want to eat this, I don't like this. So I agree with you completely. Make something that you know the kids will eat, make a couple of things that you think that they may or may not eat, and then let it go. When they say, do I have to eat this? It's totally up to you. And once they do that a couple of times, they decide on their own whether they want to eat rather than not eating because it's a fun game to see what you're going to do next.
Exactly. So you talk about behaviors that parents should ignore and behaviors that parents should not ignore. Can you kind of walk us through those two different types of behaviors?
Sure. So the kind of things that parents should ignore is behavior that comes after a parent says no or makes a request. So when you say it's time to turn the TV off, the behavior that comes after that is what you're going to ignore. When you say no to a cookie, the behavior that comes after that, you're going to ignore. When you say, can you please take the dog out? And the child is complaining about that, ignore it. So anything you're making a request or anytime you say no, you're going to ignore that stuff because it's really there for your benefit to try and get you to react. It's like, the hook with the carrot and it's like, please, react to me. Don't do it. And then anything that's annoying, parents should ignore. So there's nothing more encouraging to a child when they make annoying noises and you say, please stop that. It's annoying. It's like a light bulb goes on over the kid's head and it's like, oh, that's annoying. I should definitely do that more. Again, ignore it. It's the same thing with cursing. I've had parents ask me over and over again, it happened to me once even. I backed out of a space, a pediatrician, and I hit a pole and I said a bad word. And, my kids heard it. And so kids hear these words and then they repeat it. And as soon as they do, every adult in the room either giggles or like rushes in and is like, please don't say that. And of course the kid's like, this is a super fun game. I should definitely try and do this more. And then same thing with teenagers who are cursing for effect or saying disrespectful things. So all of that should be ignored. Anything that's pushing buttons, testing behavior, slamming doors, all that we should ignore. And that actually encompasses a good amount of behavior, but really it's things that are in response to the antecedent. So it's the function of the behavior is to get a reward, to get, either the positive reinforcement or to get the negative, which is to remove something. All of that stuff we can ignore.
That's a lot of stuff.
That's a lot of good stuff.
I know. I'm sitting here thinking of my own kids and I'm like, yeah, that's, I think I'm pretty good at ignoring a lot of that stuff because in my early motherhood, I have 4 kids and they're mostly grown at this point. I remember reading a lot of parenting books and having my first child be a very spirited child who did push all those buttons, constantly wanted to negotiate everything. I really had to read a lot to understand what was going on, but more importantly, how to respond. And I use things like asked and answered. I used to say that all the time, like when my kids were in middle school, because they would just nag for this, that, or the other. And I'd be like, asked and answered. You asked, I answered. I'm done. I'd walk away and ignore them. So it is so interesting. There are quite a few behaviors that I'm sure parents out there are thinking right now in their head that they can now start ignoring.
Right. And to remember that the whole purpose of ignoring is to not reward the behavior so that it doesn't happen again. That's the whole thing.
Exactly.
We're rewarding all of those responses. And then the kid thinks this is a good game, or I like how I get you angry, or I get my reward and I'm going to do it more often. The thing about the asked and answered, I love that. To me, I say to my kids, I'm ignoring you. They know they've read my book and they know when I turn my back that it's over, right? The conversation is over. You've asked, I've answered, it's over. The problem is a lot of kids are very skilled at then keeping it going and really pushing on parents' hot buttons. And that's when it takes a lot of practice, especially when you have a spirited child or you have one that really pushes you to the limits. Those are the ones that are the hardest to ignore because they know your weakness. They know what's going to really get you to respond. And that's when we have to work the hardest to ignore it.
When you're thinking of behaviors, though, that we should not ignore, let's cover those too, because you don't want to ignore everything, right? There are some things that you really should pay attention to and address.
Right. So anytime a child is in pain, whether it's physical or emotional, we never ignore that. So when there's crocodile tears, when we've said no to something and the child starts, whimpering and looking up to see if you're looking, that's the kind of thing we can ignore, right? That's manipulative. But when a child is crying because they're really upset that they can't go out and play with their friends and they're feeling something, we're not going to ignore that. We're going to show some empathy and we're going to engage the child. We're also not going to let a child put themselves in danger or anybody else. So I see parents ignoring their kids in the supermarket while the kid is tearing up the place. We're not going to allow kids to vandalize or to damage property or to hurt somebody else. Even if what we're responding to them is going to reinforce it in some way, we can't let that happen. And then the last most important thing that we should never ignore is the good behavior. And what I found in my experience is that parents are responding so often to the unwanted, unpleasant stuff that they're actually not paying attention for the good stuff and not rewarding that. And so if there's no reward, it won't be repeated. So if we don't reward the good stuff, they're not going to repeat that. And they're just going to keep getting us for the bad stuff. It could be little things. Like for me, I remember to say thank you to my kids for emptying the dishwasher or walking the dog or doing something for me. Every single time I try and say it. Do I need to? No. They should know that's part of living in the house and that's a chore. But I want them to know I'm thankful so that they feel good about themselves so that they want to do it again. And so, or if I see the siblings being nice to each other, or if I see someone picking up their clothes without being asked, all these little things, they're needing our attention. And if we give them the attention for the good stuff, they're a lot less likely to look for it in less desirable ways.
So one of the things you mentioned that should not be ignored in the book is overeating. So because we're talking about nutrition and feeding kids, I especially was attentive to the food and the eating examples you brought up in the book. Can we explore how a parent might address overeating in a child in a way that doesn't reinforce the behavior?
Yeah. So I'm sure you know way more than me that discussing eating with kids is very, very tricky. Any comment about portion size or choices risks being reinforcing. For me, as a social worker, I'm much more important at seeing the overeating as a sign that there's something else going on. Why is the child overeating? Is it an emotional issue? Is it a medical issue? And does it need to be evaluated? So I try and figure out why the child is overeating. Was there a trauma? Is the child dealing with pain? Is there a sibling issue? And then try and help the parents figure out what the underlying cause is and address the underlying cause and almost not address the eating directly. And then use things like, having healthy options in the house, using smaller plates, not serving family style, or some other family style would work better. It really depends on the family, but making small changes without actually discussing the eating is how I would work at first. And then also if the child might need to see a therapist or a nutritionist down the road, but I think it's better if it's not the parent who's the one managing the child's eating, because I think that becomes a very powerful game and doesn't improve the eating, but it does create all kinds of other issues.
I agree. I totally agree. And I often say, and I feel this way too, that, just as you do, that the overeating is a symptom of something else. And it can't, from a nutrition standpoint, I'm always looking at, is there structure? Is this child getting enough, nutrients, sustaining, satisfying nutrients throughout the day? Or is there consistent nutrition, good nutrition going in, or is it a bunch of junk that's not filling and causes a lot of hunger over, frequently throughout the day? But there's a lot of, is there restriction? That's a big one that I work with, food restriction. You can't have a second helping. You can't have any sweets. You can't have. Well, psychologically, you want it. So I'm always looking at it from that standpoint. But I agree with you. The overeating is less likely to be biologically driven and more psychologically driven. So what is it that's driving it, and how can that be addressed?
I've also found that the overeating can stem from a lot of positive reinforcement that's come along the way. Look at what a good eater you are. Oh, you've cleaned your plate. I love the way you ate all of that. Oh, and we talk about our kids in front of our kids when they're little all the time. Oh, he's such a good eater. You should see what he can eat. He can really pack it in. All of these things. And the kid thinks that's a good thing. We should really pack it in. My mother is so proud of me when I eat all of everything that's on my plate. And they get a lot of attention for the way that they eat. I'm mindful of this with my son, who is a great eater in the sense that he'll try anything and is very brave and really enjoys eating. But now I'm also trying to be mindful of the way I reinforce that, so it doesn't go to a place where he's eating now just to be reinforced. So I think sometimes it can come from that. And parents, that's part of why I like parents to observe themselves a little bit before making any changes and make notes and see like, okay, what am I saying? What am I doing? What's actually the dynamic at the table? And for parents that, that's not possible. That's why they have me or you or someone come in who can kind of observe from the outside and see what, and once I pointed out, parents are like, oh yeah, I totally see that. But they hadn't seen it before.
Mm-hmm. I find too, and in working with families around food and eating, that on top of just that early commenting on eating and, the things that happen in those early years, that there's also still a lot of talking at the table that can be, I guess, probably more negative reinforcing than anything. But just, as you mentioned earlier, parents feel like they need to engage the child and correct the behavior and lecture and teach. I see that happening at the dinner table all the time. You should have this. It's so good for you. It's healthy and you should eat more vegetables. You'll be healthy when you grow up. Like all this lecturing
Yep.
around food and nutrition. I'm always like, don't talk about food and nutrition at the table
Right.
ever. Like it doesn't, unless they ask you, do not bring it up.
Right.
Because it just it's like a loaded gun. It draws so much emotionality along with it, that topic, for some reason.
Yep.
It's very hard to have those conversations generated from a parent fall or land in a positive way for a child.
Yeah. And I also think there's an opportunity cost. So if you're spending your whole meal talking about what they're eating and how they should eat and why they should drink their milk, or that they should sit quietly in their chair, how they should use their fork and napkin, you're wasting this valuable, precious time where you're with your kids and there's no interruptions, and you're spending it on useless stuff. Like it's actually not important. Your kids will grow up and know how to use a fork and knife. Like they're going to be able to eat in restaurants and they know what to do. But at this time, let it go and focus on your kids, like the actual human beings in front of you. You'll enjoy this time. This will be a good time, something that everyone looks forward to, instead of this nagging thing. Because I don't get I do get some of it from the food point of view, but I also get from the behavioral point of view. My kid gets up a lot. He waits the last second to eat something and then he's hungry later, things like that. I get more of the behavioral stuff. And I say, you've spent so much time correcting them. Do you want them to use their fork properly, or do you want to enjoy your kid? Like, which do you want? You can't have both. And then they'll say, I want to enjoy my kid. And like, then let it go with the fork. Like, that's not the most important thing here.
So, and I'm guessing that you would suggest that if there were issues with manners or issues with behavior at the table, that you would address that, you would advise addressing that not at the table, but at a different time and place.
Right. So I tell parents to think of like the 3 most important things that they want their kids to be able to do. And for some people, that's table manners. For most people, when I explain it this way, they say, maybe it isn't table manners. But let's just say table manners is very important to you. So then I would discuss it away from the table, and then I would put that on my reward chart. And I would say, if you sit in your seat for 15 minutes and don't get up, then you get a star on your chart, or you get whatever reward we agree to, and then leave it at that. So if they don't do it, then they don't get their star. No problem. We're not going to say, oh, you got to sit here. Otherwise, you're not going to get your star. We're not going to be part of that. They get it or they don't get it. So I try and encourage the good behavior by providing those rewards, whether it's verbal or something else, which we can talk about. And that'll encourage the good behavior, and just ignore all of the other stuff.
So, let's talk about rewards. We can talk about that now, because I think rewards are they're interesting. From my perspective as a nutritionist, the feeding literature outlines food rewards as sort of a no-no. It's not recommended because they alter a child's food preferences, generally in favor of the food reward, right, which oftentimes is sweets and treats. And so what we see is over time it modifying food preferences towards more unhealthier foods. However, I don't think that the research in that area is fully developed. And there is some research on non-food rewards in the area of picky eating and helping children taste something new. And it shows that, you can use non-food rewards like a star or extra TV time or extra late bedtime as a motivator to help children try something new to eat. So in terms of what the most effective rewards would be when you think about, rewarding positive behaviors, both short and long term, what would you recommend in that area?
So it's interesting. There is no universal reward that's good for every child. Some kids are highly motivated by a sticker, a star, a high five, a stamp. They actually don't need anything. Other kids need something more material. Some kids need something immediate, or they can't see their way to getting the reward. Other kids can build up stars or points or whatever to get something bigger later on. More resistant your child is to the reward system, the more immediate the reward has to be. So I try and stay away from food rewards for a variety of reasons, but there are some kids that are literally motivated by nothing except something sweet. That is the thing they love the most. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we're struggling with something like a very resistant potty trainer or something like that, but I say for the majority of kids, it's not necessary to use foods. And I actually, there's like a free download on my website where I list 100 different rewards that parents can use for their kids. But it's important to think about what your kid likes. So one of my kids loved books and stories. So that was very motivating for her. But the other kid, that wouldn't have worked, right? For him, Legos, Matchbox cars, collectibles, things like that. There's also things like time with a parent, which I love as a reward because that's a double reward. And that might be taking a bubble bath, making slime. I think cooking together is not the same as a food reward. So spending time in the kitchen, making something, doing an outing, going, to a movie or bowling, something like that. Even video game time or time playing with a parent doing something is great. And later bedtime, there's all kinds of things. But the most important thing is to think about what is going to be motivating to your particular child. Do you have a gamer? Well, then that's a good reward. If your kid doesn't care about video games, then that's not going to work. And also it needs to be age appropriate. The younger the child, the more immediate and small the reward has to be. For an older child, you really can build up rewards, like reward points or bucks and things like that for kids later on. So I think that there are a long list of rewards, but you have to kind of think carefully about the kind of kid you have.
And then I guess my follow-up question, I've written a little bit about extrinsic rewards and intrinsic rewards and intrinsic motivation. Where does that cross over then? Like you're offering, so I have a child who's extremely motivated by money. Like she'll do anything for money. And, well, not anything, but you know what I mean?
She's motivated.
She's motivated by money. And if you're constantly, giving money for a grade, for example, at what point in a child does that cross over from, oh, I'm going to do this because I'm going to get some money to, oh, I'm going to do this because I really value getting good grades and it doesn't matter if I get money or not.
Right. So I like to see sometimes the reward chart as the jump start to external reward that builds to the internal. So if a child isn't interested in school, then you can't motivate them internally. It's not there. So you can motivate them from providing this external reward. But for me, the very important key in reward system is that they phase out. Right. There's no, like we get $5 for every A forever for all of high school. It's only for a kid who's really not motivated to get the work done. And we might do a reward for just handing the work in. Because again, some kids get an A really easily and they're not actually trying hard. And what are we rewarding them for? And other kids try really hard, they get a B. So I like to try and work it so we're working on effort. But then as they get better at doing whatever it is we're asking them to, whether it's studying, whether it's turning in their homework, whether it's cleaning their room, then the rewards get harder to get. So you have to put your clothes away 5 days in a row in order to get the reward, or 3 times this week. And once they get good at that, you say, okay, you need to keep your room clean for an entire week. If you keep your room clean for an entire week, then we will, have whatever the big reward that we set up in advance is. I take you to GameStop and you get to buy a new game, or we throw a party at the pool with your friends or whatever it is. And then we take that off the chart. We're no longer rewarding for cleaning up your room or for handing in your homework. You're already good at that. And then the internal reward kicks in, where we're going to continue to say, hey, good job. You did a good job there, or I'm proud of you, or how do you feel about your accomplishment? And we try and build on the rewards that way. But, for me, life is full of naturally occurring rewards, right? I get money for my work. I get a raise if I do a good job. I get, people saying I did a good job, or I might bake something for a neighbor who's not feeling well. And she tells me she's so thankful. And that makes me feel good. And that's a reward. I mean, life has rewards. So I think a lot of parents are a little bit squeamish about giving out rewards because they think, well, I don't want to reward something. They should already know how to do this, or they should already be motivated. Well, we all get motivated by rewards, big and little, all the time in real life. And there's nothing wrong with that. And better to reward them for the good stuff than continuing to provide attention and negative rewards for the bad stuff.
Let's shift real quick back to the principles behind improving behavior. You outlined 6 steps. Can you take us through what those 6 steps would be? And I just want to say to the listeners out there, these are described in depth in Catherine's book, Ignore It. But just give us sort of a bird's eye view. You don't have to dig into every single one in great detail because we'll leave that to, potential readers. But can you just give us a sense of what those 6 steps are?
Sure. So the first 2 steps you only do in the very beginning. It's really to help parents see what's going on, see the dynamic with their kids, see where they're rewarding behavior where they should be not. And so I say first observe. We've talked a little bit about this just for a week, even could be a couple of days. See what's happening. See when you say no, what happens after, and then what do you typically do after that? See how you're feeling. See what are the behaviors that are really triggers for you or for your child, and kind of make a list of those, because it's easier to identify a couple of areas that are struggling, points for you, whether it's mealtime or turning off the video games or homework time or bedtime. And then you can focus on ignore it at those times rather than it's just this big concept and I don't know when to do it. So I encourage parents to observe and make a list of target behaviors that they want to work on, whether it's whining, complaining, negotiating, or whatever. And then really the ignore it is a 4-step process. And the first thing is you identify that the child is, doing one of those behaviors and you ignore it, right? So can I have a cookie? The child asks and you say no, and the behavior begins. And now we begin ignore it. Okay. But the thing is, it's selective ignoring. You're not really ignoring. You're only looking like you're ignoring the kid, because I want you to listen carefully. And that's the second step. Because as soon as the child stops the behavior, we want to re-engage right away, because we're not ignoring the child. We're just kind of ignoring the behavior. So the child misbehaves. The first step is to ignore. The second step is to listen. And when the behavior stops, that's the third step. You re-engage. Okay. So the child asked for a cookie. We said no. The tantrum's happening. We're ignoring it, but we're listening carefully. And then as soon as it stops, we re-engage with, okay, would you like to start your art project now? Or let's get in the car. We have to pick up your brother, or whatever it may be. We don't talk about what just happened. We just re-engage and move on. And then the fourth step is repair. And this isn't something that often has to happen, but sometimes during the behavior, a child may throw something or may hit someone, or a parent may be less perfect and say something that they shouldn't have said before they started to ignore it. And that's when either party they do apologizing, or they clean up, or they repair the situation, and then everybody moves on. But most often it's just ignore, listen, re-engage. That's the most important part.
So can we go through a couple of real life applications?
Yes.
And apply these steps to more food related scenarios? I know we talked a little bit about bad manners, talked a little bit about complaining about food. Mm-hmm. What about if a parent finds that their child has been sneaking food, finds wrappers in the bedroom, for example? How do you handle that with the ignore it process?
So I wouldn't ignore that. So I only ignore behaviors where the purpose is to manipulate, to get a reward. In this case, none of that is happening. The function of the behavior is to not get caught. So we don't want to ignore that. In this case, the child is not hiding the wrappers for a reward or attention. They're hiding it because they did something that they perceive to be wrong and they don't want to be found out. So I would address this very carefully. I wouldn't blame, I wouldn't shame the child, because that's just going to make them go deeper into the closet, basically, and figure out more, again, almost like the overeater, like what's going on here? Why is food being stolen? Why is food being put away? Maybe there are too harsh restrictions. Maybe there was food shaming before about choices. And then for the parent and the child to kind of reevaluate what's been going on there. But that's an example where I wouldn't ignore it.
What if at the table, a child's behavior just really deteriorates? They melt down, they start throwing a temper tantrum. At what point is that a shift from being about the food and the disappointment to the parent focusing on the behavior?
So there's something called an extinction burst, where the parent starts ignoring it, or the rules have shifted and the child is like, wait a second. Normally I tantrum and complain and I get another option, or I get attention, or they try and appease me, or they take away the carrots, or whatever it is. Usually my behavior works, and now it's not working. And so I get worse, because I'm sure this will work if I do it more, or if I do it stronger. That's actually a sign the kid is getting the message that the rules have changed, or that you're not going to engage. And if you're doing ignore it, that's a good sign. And I would say continue to ignore it. And on the other side, when the kid's like, wow, I did all of that and still nothing happened. okay, I shouldn't bother with that anymore. It goes away pretty quickly. But sometimes what happens is, the parent puts the food on the table, and for whatever reason, they usually provide something else. And today they're not in the mood and they're tired or they're not feeling well. And they decide to say, just eat it. I'm not giving you an alternative. And then it becomes, again, not about the food anymore. And it becomes this battle of wills. And that's when the behavior escalates. All of that I would completely ignore. And usually what I tell parents is when you're done eating, the meal is over. So if the child has not eaten by the time you're done eating, then it's time to pick up the food. And usually if this is the first time we're doing this, I'll have the parents warn the child, it's 5 more minutes. I'm almost done with my meal. If you want to eat, now's the time. And that is it. Nothing else. We're not going to address their behavior. We're not going to talk to them about what they're doing. We're just going to put our head down. We're going to engage other children, our spouse, our partner, whatever it may be. And then when we finish eating, we take the food up. And now the kid's going to want to eat. All of a sudden the kid's, oh, no, I'll eat now. No, it's over. This is where parents make that last minute mistake where they were almost over the hump and the kid will go to bed hungry. And in this case, tomorrow, when this happens again and the kid sees, okay, I didn't get anything and I was really hungry all night, I should sit down and focus on eating my dinner. And when parents are working on a program and they're very consistent and they're being careful not to reinforce or provide many options or provide a disincentive for eating meals, the kids learn very quickly. What I see a lot is parents get through the mealtime, they pick up the plates, they get through and nobody's having any dinner. Okay, fine, so be it. We put it away. And then it's 8:30 and the kid's crying in bed. I'm so hungry. I'm not going to be able to sleep. And, that is such a soft spot for parents. It's like, it's so hard to walk away from that. And so what they say is, okay, you can have an apple or an applesauce or a cheese. They think, okay, this is a healthy snack. So I'm giving them something nutritious. But the thing is, it's a disincentive to actually spend time eating because I know I'm going to get a snack of something else later. They didn't eat what was there. They got a substitute. There's no motivation to actually eat it. So I try and connect the second part later, which parents think that's a totally separate incident, but it isn't. It's very related.
Yeah. And I see this all the time. And I find myself, coaching parents around, it's okay to let your child go to bed without dinner. Yep. It's okay to let these natural consequences play out because that's how children learn to self-regulate their eating too. Not only just, how they learn to adopt more positive behaviors, but they also learn to self-regulate their eating that way. They learn that if they go to bed, like you said, hungry and they're hungry all night, they're going to get up the next day and they're going to eat a lot better. They're going to make a mental note when they come to the table and they get the warning, 5 more minutes and dinner's over.
Suddenly they're eating.
Exactly. And I do find this to be such a fracture in parenting pretty universally. Yeah. And it's, I guess, I don't know, what would you say is behind that? Guilt? Inadequacy?
I think that a lot of it is guilt, but I think many parents feel like if I do nothing else with my children, if I at least feed them a good meal, I've done my job as a parent. There's something about feeding your kids and getting them to eat well. I don't know if it's something from how important it is when they're very newborns to get them to eat and to gain weight. I don't know if it's our socialization, but there's something very, very powerful about having a child eat a good meal. We feel so successful as a parent. And so we also feel a great amount of guilt for them feeling any pain. And if we think we're the cause of that pain, that's very hard to handle. And so I think parents really get in a cycle of feeling uncomfortable because their kid is uncomfortable and trying to fix that pain. And then the kid learns the wrong lesson, which is, avoiding something that we have to do and getting a sort of a shortcut later on is the way to go. And then they never feel the pain. They never feel the natural consequence and they don't learn from their experiences. And so, it actually goes way beyond the dining room and it goes into life. If you're micromanaging everything for your kids and not letting them feel any discomfort and you're jumping in and repairing things all the time for them, they're actually going to not be ready for adulthood because they haven't learned to make choices, good decisions for themselves based on consequences. They've never felt the consequences. They don't even know what they look like. So yeah, I really encourage parents to kind of think about that. And also I encourage parents to think about meals for 3 days. Your child, nothing terrible is going to happen if a child skips one meal. In fact, if they don't eat well one day, it's probably not going to be a big problem. If they don't eat dinners, but they're very good at breakfast and lunch, that's absolutely fine. Some kids are done by the end of the day. Some kids are not breakfast eaters. That's okay. They eat something very light and they have a very big lunch and dinner. But to try and think of eating across a couple days, and that takes away some of that emergency, like my kid is hungry right now, I need to do something, even though they didn't eat what I provided for them.
One of the things that I hear is, and I'm not laughing, but it just occurred to me that one of the things that I hear is that parents will say, well, if they don't eat something before bedtime, they're going to be up in the middle of the night. And that means I'm going to be up in the middle of the night.
Yeah. So I actually tell parents, I would rather you have a horrendous evening and afternoon, which you will, but then the child learns the lesson, then you have months or years of this, right? Do you want to rip the Band-Aid off now and just be done with it in 2 days? Because kids learn so quickly that,
fast.
When parents aren't, giving in or fixing these problems for them, they learn pretty quickly. Or do you want to do it halfway and suffer with the kid not eating and complaining every day at every single mealtime, but then you're getting your night's sleep, and almost always a parent says, I want to rip the Band-Aid off. They just need education and support, and then they're willing to do it.
What's the success rate?
Oh, I find parents almost immediately feel better, even before the behavior changes, which does happen very, very quickly, like 3 to 5 days, depending on how long the parent had been reinforcing it and how they had been reinforcing it. But right away, the parent disconnects from the battle of wills and they feel a lot better. They view the behavior very differently and they don't feel as emotionally connected to it. And that makes them feel better. And they look at their children better automatically. And then when they see the behavior start to change, which happens so quickly, they're like, this is like this miracle thing that I can't believe I didn't do this all this time. Like, that's amazing. So I have a very high success rate about it. I'd used it with parents for years in the home.
I can see how it aligns so well with feeding kids. Just the process of, all the little things that can crop up with feeding kids and table behavior and all that kind of stuff, short order cooking.
Yep.
It aligns with so much of all of that. Any last words of advice around common obstacles that you may face with parents as they implement Ignore It?
2 things is when you're actually ignoring it, it's not so easy. It sounds easy. It sounds like, oh, what's so hard? I'm not doing anything. I'm ignoring it. It is one of the hardest moments of the day, right? Because the kid is really pushing you, is really pushing your buttons. And so I recommend parents go to a happy place, like a literal happy place in their brain. Like for me, it's on the beach with a friend. I saw a donkey. It makes me smile and laugh. I go there. For other parents, it's flipping through a magazine or it's thinking about something exciting that's coming up for them. But to actually practice going to a happy place in your brain and disconnecting from that emotional moment will help you. And then the second thing is forgive yourself if you get it wrong. I wrote the book. I don't always get it right. Sometimes I'll be arguing with my teenager and my son will say, Mom, you should be ignoring it. And he's right. It's not easy, this parenting thing. We can't get it right all the time. If you don't get it right and you go to bed at night and you're thinking, gosh, this was such a bad day. Well, tomorrow's a new day. It's never too late to make a change and you can just start again. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just get back on.
I was thinking of when you were describing the table and the child melting down and ignoring the child at the table and the child getting louder and more forceful and how difficult that moment would be for a parent to be at a table and ignoring the child that's melting down, who is intensifying and diverting their attention to the ones who are, behaving appropriately or whatever. How difficult that is. I mean, I remember as a young mother, one of my kids would follow me around. I literally would lock myself in the bathroom like I have to get away. So I like how you describe because, mentally going to your happy place because you can't always physically get away.
Yeah. And
you can't disconnect physically.
They learn your body language. They know when Ignore It is starting. They can see it. You've turned away. You've averted your eyes. You're not engaging verbally. They can see it right away. And once they get the hang of it, they realize nothing's coming. It's over. And it actually shortens that whole process.
So where can my listeners find your book and connect with you?
So my book is at Amazon or your local bookstore. And you can find me on Facebook and Twitter at The Family Coach.
Awesome. Catherine, thank you so much for all your insight and advice. Really great. I know the parents are going to love this. Okay, folks, there you go. I hope you enjoyed learning from Dr. Pearlman about how you can ignore annoying behaviors in your child so that ultimately you get the best out of him or her. The Nourished Child is a free resource for parents who want nutrition and feeding advice. Many of you write to me with questions and compliments, so I appreciate it. But if you want to have the most impact on this show, and if this show has had an impact on you, head over to iTunes or one of your favorite apps and subscribe to The Nourished Child. If you have time to rate and review the show, that's even better. Up next on The Nourished Child, we're talking back to school and the very real barriers families experience around this time. That'll be episode number 91, so be sure to tune in. I plan to cover 5 barriers and offer up some suggestions to make that back to school time frame a little bit easier. For now, I'm thrilled you joined me, whether you're a brand new listener or a tried and true loyal fan. Thanks for being here. You're helping yourself and your child just by tuning in. Be sure to snag a quick hug from your child today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.